crime wave in San Francisco, Biden to run for re-election in 2024, and the Waukesha parade crash. That and more on this week's headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Target announced their stores would be closed on Thanksgiving moving forward. Target was closed last Thanksgiving, citing safety concerns over the pandemic. This practice will now remain in place. But this is unfortunate for last-minute shoppers, and especially rough for Target employees, who now have to spend Thanksgiving with their families. Darn it, Target, that was their excuse to get out of the house. And considering how next year's Thanksgiving is going to be right after midterm elections, I bet a bunch of Target employees would rather be ice road trucking than sitting through family Thanksgiving arguments. However, Target will still be open on Black Fridays, stuck with family for Thursday and stuck working on Black Friday. The worst of both worlds. But Target closed by choice. Meanwhile, in San Francisco, several stores were forced to temporarily close after dozens of businesses were robbed by what the police chief in a neighboring city called roving caravans of vehicles targeting cannabis operations, retail shops, and pharmacies. Leave it to San Francisco to find a way to make flash mobs even more annoying. In response to these robberies, San Francisco Mayor London Breed announced, "We're going to be making some changes to Union Square and how cars are able to access. There will be limited access in terms of when you come to this area." I'm sure that'll make businesses feel better, knowing that during the busiest shopping season of the year, customers will have limited access to their stores. Also, if criminals can't use cars, they'll just find new ways to burglarize the stores, namely bird scooters. This looks like Ocean's 11 if all the criminals still lived with their parents. Just to be safe, I say it's time we outlaw bird scooters, which is something I've been saying since the first time I saw bird scooters. The president of the California Retailers Association blames San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin for the crime wave that's been plaguing the city for months now, saying, "The answer really lies, I think, partially with the district attorney and the fact that he's made it clear he will not prosecute many of these crimes." When people hear that, they look at San Francisco and think they can commit these crimes and there will not be any consequences for their behavior. If that's true, yeah, it makes sense. Fear of consequences is the only way laws work. If I knew laws weren't going to be enforced, I'd go on a major crime spree, rolling through stop signs, downloading music I didn't pay for, and wearing socks with sandals. That last one falls under the jurisdiction of the fashion police. I'm a rebel. President Biden ordered 50 million barrels of oil to be released from America's strategic reserve in an effort to alleviate energy costs. I can only assume that reserve is known internally as the Bush stash. This move is intended to help lower gas prices in the U.S., which are more than 50% higher than they were this time last year. These barrels will be moved into the market starting mid to late December. But with Americans traveling for the holidays and gas prices usually lagging in response to changes in oil prices, prices at the pump likely won't fall anytime soon, especially since a big portion of that oil is being bought up not by local oil refineries, but by China and India. That's because what's being released is sour crude oil, which has high levels of sulfur. U.S. refineries don't want to buy it because making it usable in the U.S. requires a lot of extra processing. That processing requires lots of natural gas, which is more expensive because natural gas prices are also spiking. But foreign buyers, like India and China, are happy to take sour crude off our hands for cheap. This is part of a globally coordinated release of strategic reserves, which aims to bring prices down by increasing global oil supply. Again, if this works, it's going to take some time to actually lower gas prices. On the bright side, if U.S. gas prices remain this high, then that means the roving caravans of vehicles in San Francisco won't be able to afford fuel to commit their crimes. which is even more reason to outlaw bird scooters. Prices not dropping immediately won't make consumers happy. And while some environmentalists support Biden tapping the oil reserves, I can think of one who's very disappointed, especially because the U.S. and other nations just pledged to start phasing out fossil fuels. So that promise lasted less than 2 weeks, which was a promise broken even quicker than Biden's pledge to not implement a vaccine mandate. Biden is giving off big dad that promises to come to your Little League game but never shows up vibes. At this point, when Biden breaks a promise, the most disappointing part is how I'm no longer surprised. More after the break. Welcome back. President Biden's approval ratings are at the lowest point in his presidency. So naturally, now is the perfect time to announce he'll be running for a second presidential term in 2024. Yep, the guy who just turned 79 and whose poll numbers are tumbling harder than he did on the stairs of Air Force One. This is like a horrible first date where the guy lies about everything and makes the girl pay the bill and then says, "So, you want to come back to my place?" Of course, Joe Biden still has to make it to 2024, which isn't guaranteed since he's 79 and people of that age are prone to all sorts of accidents, at least according to Kamala Harris, who winked when she said accident. Vice President Harris has a vested interest in the health of others, though, as she announced the Biden administration will invest $1.5 billion from the COVID relief bill in healthcare workers who pledged to work in underserved communities. Harris said, "Our nation must invest in a healthcare workforce that looks like America and provide access to equitable healthcare for all Americans." As nice as it would be to have a healthcare workforce that looks like America, many Americans don't even know what the current healthcare workforce looks like since they can't afford healthcare in the first place. Maybe we can take care of that first. Baby steps, which is my advice to Kamala Harris and also to all of you working through a broken toe since you don't have enough cash to visit the ER. Speaking of the Biden administration's health plans, the U.S. government is seeking a federal appeal to lift a court-ordered stay on the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for businesses with 100 or more employees. The mandate was blocked by the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which called it staggeringly overbroad and a one-size-fits-all sledgehammer, which sounds like a gross pickup line used on that horrible first date. Lawsuits were then transferred to the Sixth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which will now review the ruling from the Fifth Circuit. Meanwhile, countless businesses are stuck in the middle of this political battle, waiting in limbo to see what's going to happen. Except, of course, for the businesses that suddenly found themselves with fewer than 100 employees thanks to Black Friday. Forget COVID, that's the biggest danger to the health of retail workers. After the break, Thomas Jefferson is canceled in New York City. Welcome back. A statue of Thomas Jefferson, the third U.S. president and author of the Declaration of Independence, has been removed from the New York City Council chamber over his links to slavery. The co-chair of the council's Black, Latino, and Asian caucus said Jefferson embodied some of the most shameful parts of our country's long and nuanced history. It is time for the city to turn the page and move forward. First of all, it's a little late to cancel Thomas Jefferson, since God already canceled him in 1826. Second of all, if you're upset about Jefferson being a slave owner, wait until you hear about George Washington and like 10 other presidents. Am I saying we shouldn't remove their images and monuments? On the contrary, I say if you get rid of one, you have to get rid of them all. Mainly because I think it'd be awesome to see The Rock on Mount Rushmore. Twice. And when you visit, you can pay for your parking with your Robert Downey Jr. $1 bills. Speaking of bills in New York City, a bill was introduced that, if passed, would allow more than 800,000 non-U.S. citizens to vote in municipal elections. The bill says that residents must be living in the city for at least 30 days prior to the election, and they won't be able to vote for anything at a state or federal level. While this bill has Republicans scared of its repercussions, it's Democrats who should really be alarmed by it. Since if that many non-citizens are allowed to vote in New York City, the first thing they're going to want to do is ungentrify the communities taken from them by rich white liberals. For the first time, the U.S. was named a backsliding democracy by a think tank in Stockholm. The International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, or International IDEA, said this determination was based on the U.S. falling victim to authoritarian tendencies under Donald Trump and voting bills being pushed in several red states. International IDEA also said Trump's claims of the election being stolen were repeated in countries such as Brazil, Mexico, Myanmar, and Peru, leading to a decline in democracy in those nations as well, which goes to show that even when other nations think the U.S. is on the decline, they still have to admit we're the #1 trendsetters. USA! USA! USA. For anyone worried about this, don't be. Saying the U.S. democracy started to decline under Trump is ridiculous. As someone who's been covering the news for a long time, I can assure you that democracy in the U.S. started to decline way before Trump. There. Don't you feel better already? A man intentionally plowed his SUV through a crowd of people in Waukesha, Wisconsin, at an annual Christmas parade. 6 people are dead and dozens more are injured. According to police, the suspect, a black man named Darrell E. Brooks, was involved in and fled a domestic disturbance minutes before the incident. He'd been out on a $1,000 bond after allegedly running over the mother of his child on November 2nd. Wait, his bond was set at only $1,000 after running someone over? Why was it so cheap? Was that some sort of terrible early Black Friday deal? Even San Francisco does a better job of discouraging crime than that. The Waukesha police chief attempted to dispel rumors about the attack.
There's no pursuit that led up to this incident. This is not a terrorist event.
But why let that get in the way of a good narrative? Some people are blaming this attack on Black Lives Matter. Others are blaming it on the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. And some are blaming it on white supremacy. Because everything is white supremacy's fault. By the way, I covered the Rittenhouse verdict and the idea that it's proof of white supremacy earlier this week. Check that out. I just got a paper cut. And this paper is white. White supremacy strikes again. This blame game is being played because obviously the most tragic thing about this story would be to let it go without getting any political gotcha points out of it. Black Lives Matter is being blamed because Brooks allegedly had social media posts showing support for the movement. That's a pretty flimsy reason to blame BLM. Look, an edible arrangement. Clearly this was a hate crime. That's like saying that the Kyle Rittenhouse shootings were a terrorist attack because he once made social media posts supporting Blue Lives Matter. Of course, that's exactly what some on the left said, and that was also a flimsy motive. And even though Brooks, under the name Math Boy Fly, rapped about guns, murder, and a dislike for Donald Trump, saying that's proof of motive is like saying Kyle Rittenhouse playing Call of Duty was proof of intent. To be fair, Brooks also had a Facebook post where he talked about how white people were racist and how they should be knocked out. But that's still not enough to determine the Waukesha attack was racially motivated. Is it possible Brooks was radicalized and this was an anti-white hate crime spurred on by his anger over the Rittenhouse verdict? Maybe. But it's also possible that Brooks, a repeat criminal offender with a history of violence and drug abuse, just decided to run people over for another non-political reason. Yeah, that's also possible, especially considering he has a recent history of running people over. Assumptions are irresponsible and dangerous. Because you know what happens when you assume? It makes an astronomically high amount of clickbait ad revenue. It's best to stick to the facts. If it looks like a duck, talks like a duck, and commits vehicular homicide like a duck, then logic tells you that it's probably white supremacy. Speaking of white supremacy, the verdict in the trial of 3 white men. They were charged with murdering Ahmaud Arbery, a black man killed while running through a town in Georgia last year. The Washington Post expressed concern, suggesting that a nearly all-white jury was almost certain to be biased. And yet the jury found all 3 white men guilty. And if you think this means justice was served, or if you believe a jury of peers is still the best way to decide murder cases, you're wrong. If you ask CNN, it's still about racism. It just somehow didn't apply this time. And if you ask the New York Times, it was all about racism. But racism lost. Because despite the fair trial and the actual outcome, it was still about white supremacy. So what do you think about the stories we covered this week? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. Be sure to visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.